So excited to have Keith Prather, co-founder at Armada Corporate Intelligence, co-founded in 2000, 2001 with Chris Keel. Managing partner, has worked with Fortune 500 companies on everything from economic forecasting and M&A strategy, strategic planning, corporate marketing, and so forth. You were a CFO for a while.
I was, yeah. So I've
Yeah.
been down in the trenches, yeah.
Yeah, so you understand our challenges, our challenges as well as COOs.
Yeah.
Armada's services, intelligence briefings, strategic intelligence, private market intelligence, ghost writing. So if you're looking for a ghost writer, industry analytics and keynote presentations. And there's also an amazing newsletter that comes out weekly called The Flagship. And we have a nice arrangement with Armada Corporate Intelligence where all of our members get a discounted rate. If you're interested in receiving the Flagship, and I would encourage you to do so, just let me know. You can message me, email me, or whatnot, and we'll get you signed up for that. I guess at this point, I'm going to hand it off to Keith, and let's get this show started.
All right, sounds great. My presentation style, guys, I love the COO forum because it's so interactive and I feel like I'm with friends. So, you know what? I've got the chat up here. You guys interrupt me anytime, and I may get on a roll and I may start talking fast because I get excited about something. Just pipe up and say, "Hey, dummy, stop for a second. I have a question." Okay, literally, we're among friends, so we'll just rock and roll that way. Okay. I'm gonna go macro, super high level, talk about some cool little backstories and what's going on in the economy. Hopefully, by just translating it that way, I just don't sit and just pound you with a bunch of data. So we're gonna go through that, and I want to start off with a big old theme. The theme that I've got for you today is right now. I have never seen the disparity between economic forecasts for the rest of the year and into 26 than I see right now. So this is a survey of economists. There's about 100 different economists that got surveyed from Wall Street and around the country, all blue chippers, and it was just their forecast for the S&P 500. And today, their forecast is it could be anywhere from 7,000 points down to about 5,200 points. And as one of them said, when you look at that split and that range, which we've almost never seen before, you could literally drive a semi truck through that range. In other words, we don't know where the economy's going. We don't have a lot of great understanding of it. So what Chris and I typically do is we'll go back and we'll try to find a lot of the economic fundamentals and what we understand about those fundamentals. We don't try to speculate too much, and we'll use that as our guide. And so a lot of the things I'm going to throw at you here is going to be a little bit away from maybe the popular narrative. We'll try to get to the nuts and the bolts and the data and really understand the data in the sense that you better understand your operating environment and maybe what's coming. So that's my objective, all right? All right, so let's start with the Federal Reserve for a minute because a lot of you, I don't care what business you're in, I don't care what part of the economy we run in, whether it's as a consumer, whether it's running a business as you're running, running as a COO, trying to manage, it matters what happens with interest rates. Interest rates are going to shape our world, and we know that. And when we got the early July, late June statement from the Federal Reserve, the overall decision that the Fed made to hold interest rates steady was not the big shocker. But what rattled markets and what stunned all of us was the data behind the scenes. And I just want to highlight a couple things for you. Very quickly, the Federal Reserve is pretty dismal when it comes to their forecast for the economy. They think that we're going to get GDP of about 1.4% this year. Last year we were clipping along at about 2.5%, just for perspective. And so they've cut the forecast for GDP almost in half. And then for 2026 and 2027, they're kind of like, yeah, it's still going to be dismal science here. It's still going to be really weak moving out and below their March projection. But the rest of the market doesn't believe that way. And I'll show that to you in a couple minutes. They also said the unemployment rate, though, is going to stay pretty steady. So 4.5% historically is a very low rate. I'll show you a couple charts to kind of illustrate this, just to help you understand. We're going to talk about labor a little bit later on. And I'm going to give you some brand new projections I've never presented to anybody else about the impact of AI on jobs, baby boomer retirements, kind of looking at all these things that are happening in the labor market and giving you a net number that I think is going to stun you in a good way. If you're worried about your job or being replaced by robots or I think you're going to be shocked at the data. But right now, the Fed's got the unemployment rate pretty unchanged at about 4.5%. The big kicker came in with inflation and what they're worried about with inflation. If you look at what they did, we were cruising along at about 2.7% inflation earlier this year. All the data that we look at when there are thousands of different inflation measures. And when we break them down to their core, just the simple inflation, average street level inflation, we're still running about 2.7%. The Fed's target rate is about 2. 2.3 is okay. 2 is great. 2.7, a little warm, but not that bad. But they think that tariffs are going to push that inflation rate up to about 3%. But also note what they did here. So that 3% inflation rate is like a point in time, one shock, and then it's over. We go into 2026 and the average inflation rate, they've got down around 2.4%, and then they've got in 2027 down to 2%. So the way they're all thinking about tariffs at the moment is that once the tariff impact kicks in, that we do get this momentary inflation surge, which I have some thoughts on that. We'll talk about it, but then it immediately goes away. And then the market stabilizes itself, and then we get into a lower inflation rate as we move on through the next several years. And that dictates what the Fed does. Now, the Fed is projecting two more quarter point cuts between now and the end of the year. And we think there's about 30% of the market that thinks that we're going to get the next quarter point cut maybe as early as this month, that they come in and they do kind of not an emergency cut, but they'll do a quick cut of a quarter point, and then we get the follow-up quarter point in December. There's about 70% of the Fed board that thinks that we don't get that first cut until about September. They think they want to watch and see what happens with tariffs. They want to watch GDP. Right now, we have pretty stable employment. We have a decent wage number. And so I think the market is stable enough that they can push it on, maybe not do their first cut until September. And a lot of that matters because that affects what happens to the Fed funds rate and it affects what happens to the 10-year treasury, and all that trickles down into mortgage rates and automotive and what we spend at a commercial level and corporate commercial investment. And so we are watching that pretty carefully. And even though a quarter point doesn't seem to matter that much, it could create enough positive sentiment in the global market that you see the US federal bond rates, the yield rates go down. And that would instantly trigger and flow through the residential housing market. It frees up cash from a lot of households. It improves discretionary spending. It really has a big ripple effect through the economy. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But this is the backdrop. This is what the Fed gave us. But I want to show you what's happening in Q2. Q2 right now, our Q2 GDP is blowing out expectations. So when we came in to this quarter, most blue chip economists, most of us, and again, remember the old joke that you ask five of us our opinion as economists, you're going to get five different answers, six if one of us went to Harvard. Let that sink in for a minute. But coming into the quarter, they thought, yeah, Q2 is going to suck. We're going to be down below 1% growth rates. And then over the course of the month, as we got data in and we started to see what was happening in the economy, they slowly improved their sentiment. And then they popped it up to about 2%. And the actual data that we've got right now shows us running a little bit hot at like 2.6%. So this kind of flies in the face what the Fed is saying, but this is sort of the reality of what's happening. And it's coming on the back of a consumer that's still spending at a pretty steady basis. We're going to talk a lot about the consumer in the back end of my presentation because it's about 70% of the economy. And if you just want to watch one thing, watch how healthy the consumer is because that will dictate all, right? And so right now the consumer is still doing pretty well overall, still spending, still finding the means to get things done. And now you got the big beautiful bill that just came out. I'll talk a little bit about the provisions in it, but it's also going to help consumer households. Other categories are also performing well. So for those of you who are like in the B2B world, if you're watching a lot of private investment, and we're seeing investment in like equipment and structures and the build out, and some of the questions I asked you up front about AI were really aimed at trying to understand how much we're going to be spending and investing in technology. And right now, what we're seeing is a surge in that spending, and there's a lot more to come. We do have some estimates on what that looks like moving forward. And then lastly, what we don't like to see is also government spending is still pretty high. And we know that the DOGE effort was to try and trim back government spending. In Q4, government spending ran as high as 18% of GDP. And largely government spending in 2024 was kind of backstopping GDP, kind of propping it up a little bit. Normal for government spending ought to be down around 9 to 10%, maybe as high as 11 to 12% when we have like a wartime event. But 18% is way too high, and it's got to get back down to a normal rate. And so, anyway, that's why you're seeing a lot of trimming at the government level, although we don't really feel it yet in the marketplace, but it is coming. Um, but that's the backstop when it comes to GDP and where we are. We're sitting right now a little bit better than expected. That's why the Fed's kind of wrestling with things a little bit. You know, they can be a little more cautious and they can take a little more time because they've got a decently growing economy, they've got a decent job market, and they're a little worried about inflation. And so they're kind of using that as their rationale to say, yeah, I'm just going to sit tight for a little bit and not really do anything. And that's the backstop. And that's kind of where we are. And it kind of brings us right up to date. And then the rest of what we're going to focus on is kind of what's coming in the second half of the year. All right, so I'm going to keep looking over here. I don't see anything. Any questions about that? Anyone want to pipe up? Or Chuck, you want to throw anything in? Or just to kind of get the whole interactive part of this kind of rolling?
Let's see who'll be the first.
Anybody? It's okay. Dean's got that look on his face like, man, I don't know about any of that. I'm not sure. Or he's like, it ought to be like 9%. I think we're going to clip along at 9
Can I
maybe.
ask a question, Keith?
Yeah, you bet.
What's the sort of general consensus amongst the economists you're talking to as it relates to the um, truth of the tariffs and how quickly we're actually going to see tariffs be really enacted versus just kind of thrown out there as a threat?
Yeah. So I'll tell you what, I'll give you the quick answer here, and then I've got a section on tariffs coming up because I do want to talk about because that is a big shaper. And just if you're watching the news over the last 24 hours, it's just getting ridiculous. And I'll talk about that. But generally, what we believe is that most companies, and I don't know how many of you are product managing, product moving, but depending on your inventory method, the type of the way you're using inventories is going to dictate when we feel the tariff impact. So if you're using FIFO, which most of the market is, I think we believe about 50% of the marketplace uses FIFO. So a lot of companies are still living off of inventories that were pre-tariff. And that's what we're selling and that's what we're moving through the market. A lot of those inventories will get depleted sometime between now and the end of Q3. And then once we see those inventories depleted, then you get the new post-tariff impact on prices. And then we'll start to see using the FIFO method, we'll start to see some of those tariffs kind of kick in and be put into place. So I would say what the Fed's waiting on and what I'm waiting on is a little more of the August, September, October inflation data before we really start to see the impact. Um, but then when we get into the tariff section, Chris, I'm going to talk a lot more about kind of the dynamics of what's happening around tariffs and the reason why the administration is being a little bolder about what they're doing. Because we're seeing a lot of global suppliers absorbing the tariff rate. And I'll talk more about that. It's like they're using discounts to basically say, I still need to move product. I still want to get new sales. US market is still critical to me. So we're seeing Chinese manufacturers right now giving 55% discounts on their products just to move them and to use US suppliers who are buying those products to basically say, I got the tariff covered for you. And we're seeing that at a higher and higher percentage, which is why we don't see a lot of pass through. Now it's product by product. It's very specific. It's very secular. Some industries, the profit margins are so tight, they're just like, I just can't do it. And so they can't absorb it. They can't discount. It is getting passed on. And that's where we see the pain. And that's where it's going to come in. So we'll talk more about it, but that's a fantastic question. That's a great kickoff. Yeah. Anything else before I move on off of GDP? Okay. So if you can't tell, I'm really apolitical, right? If Trump administration does something that's bonehead, I want to pound them on it. What Chris and I try to do is we try to stay pro-business, and if it's good for a business, good for business operations, typically we're going to be pro. So when I get into the OBBBA, basically the big beautiful bill that just got passed in July, the budget deal. There's going to be some things here, and you're going to say, yeah, what about, what about? I get it. There's a lot of fear, and depending on how you want to analyze things, this is either the worst bill ever, and it's going to send our deficit up by $3 trillion, or it's the best thing that's ever happened. What I want to do is try and get into the data to help you understand maybe where the benefits are coming from. So there are a lot of things here. You don't have to look at all this detail. I'm not going to go over it in detail, but there's a whole bunch of benefits from a tax perspective. And what we're trying to look at is the difference between the prior bill that was passed in, what was it, 2017, 2018, and where we are today under the new bill, and where we see gains or benefits. And so without going into each one of these, you can go look at it, and each of you will have your own assessment of what this looks like. But there are benefits across the board for all filers in many ways. There's going to be a bunch of them that hit just those that itemize. There's going to be families with children get benefits. There's benefits up and down the board. The bottom line is when we kind of cut through all the mess, it looks like the average household is probably going to see a net benefit, an increase in benefit over last year's tax structure of about $7,600 a year. That's what each of you, on average, depending on your income and your age and all those things, whether you have children at home or not, you get about a $7,600 benefit. There's 102 million eligible households in the US that should be able to take advantage of these benefits, and that's out of about 125 or 130 million households. Very few percentage of households won't get some benefit. So we think it boosts consumer spending. Again, remember, I'm going to focus a lot on that because that's 70% of the economy. Boost it by about $780 billion. Now there are lots of offsets to this. I know that cutting the tax increases here reduces federal income theoretically, and so it increases the deficit. And you've seen the Congressional Budget Office and their estimates that it increases it by $3 trillion over 10 years. But there is a growth component to this, and I'm one of those guys. I've been in so many corporations before as a CFO and others, but really struggling, and we never found the ability to go cut our way into profitability. There always had to be a big growth component into growing a company. And the federal government is the same way. You got to have a big growth component in trying to get the deficit cut, but the Congressional Budget Office won't take growth into account when they come up with their estimates, and so it underestimates what the real total impact will be. So we're having to hope, and what we're looking at from an economic perspective is that some of these things do generate new economic GDP, and that leads to extra income, and that offsets some of these tax cuts. But if you're just thinking about it from a consumer perspective, that's the net benefit that most households should be seeing. About $7,600, about 780 billion in annual spending. That's kind of the bottom line. That's B2C, right? So that's the consumer side of things. But there is a big business benefit. And so the business benefits, depending on, again, what industry you're in, could have a big impact. So just the impact to construction and industrial firms and those activities, we've got the 100% bonus depreciation, which was restored and made permanent up until about the year 2030. But who's counting? So qualified property, meaning just anything that's in construction equipment, vehicles, brand new structures, brand new facilities, adding on to facilities, anything that has to do with and is connected to the industrial market gets 100% bonus depreciation right up front. And it's interesting because it also applies to a lot of new equipment. So if you go out and buy new trucks that are used in an industrial capacity, 100% depreciation right up front. That's gonna boost a lot of spending, and there is some Buy American provisions in there that is gonna boost U.S. domestic production. But the real thing that I'm watching and a little concerned about, both an opportunity and a concern, is that a lot of that expensing has to be done before January 2029. So they put that little provision in there to cap this, to really front load it. So any property that you're going to take that bonus depreciation on has to be placed in service by the end of 2030. So think about it. I'll get political for just a second. Think about it from a political perspective. Knowing we're going into midterms next year, one of the things that the Trump administration has done is they really tried to put provisions around this to front load a lot of the spending. So from a corporate perspective, you're trying to manage people, you're trying to manage investment, you're trying to manage your bottom line. One of the things that's coming is this surge to beat this deadline. So when we get into 2026, a lot of companies that were thinking about doing construction projects or thinking about buying new equipment, they're going to try and front load that and try to get that put into place by 2026. The other thing is that the Federal Reserve trims interest rates like the Trump administration would like them to do. It also creates a more favorable borrowing environment, which also front loads that. So we could have a situation coming up where we're all looking at each other trying to figure out where we're going to find the labor, where we're going to find the raw materials, where we're going to find, just the resources that it takes to handle what's coming. I'm going to talk about it elsewhere, but there's roughly what I can go look at and I can find and I can put my fingers on in promises and commitments from corporations to go take advantage of this industrial benefit. I can find 5 trillion on my own in investments into the United States that should be coming before this 2030 deadline. And just for perspective, and I'm going to repeat this later, but just for perspective, today we're building out at a historical record level of about 235 billion a year in spending. And now we're going to jack that by 5 trillion. We've just never had a situation or an environment where we've gone through this before. And that's my estimate is the 5 trillion. And that's a very conservative estimate. The Trump administration is saying they've got commitments, and we see press releases and promises of maybe as much as 8 to 10 trillion. So it's going to get very interesting. But until this bill was passed and until this provision was put in there, we really couldn't understand the urgency of what was coming. I heard some very progressive folks this morning that really don't like the Trump administration, and they were talking about this in the sense that they're concerned about how much growth it could create and that we can't handle the growth. And so it doesn't matter what side of the fence you're on. It sounds like everyone's kind of coming together, understanding that what's coming could be very interesting for us and could be very challenging. So just pay attention to that. The other thing is a section 179 tax provision that allows you to deduct expenses on up to kind of $4 million in spending. So that's smaller equipment that you want to buy, as long as it has an industrial component to it, you should see some benefits from that. Overall, so there's a lot of permanent expansion of all the business tax cuts. So if companies, we know there was a percentage of the marketplace that was sitting and holding, waiting to see what they were going to get in this bill before spending. So we call them shovel-ready projects or expansion projects that were kind of ready to go, but it depended on whether they were going to continue to get these business tax cuts. And now that they have that certainty, a lot of them will go ahead and take those projects and go ahead and move them into shovel-ready and go put shovels in dirt or whatever the investment may be. It could be in high tech, it could be robotics, it could be build out, whatever it is. So that's coming. Again, not knowing your industries that well, I mean, I've heard a couple of you talk, but there's also this increase in infrastructure and defense spending. I don't think John Nelson's on the call, but John and I talk a lot. And John was from the U.S. Army, and he invited me in March to go spend some time at a national security conference. And it was a national security conference at Fort Leavenworth. And one of the things that it was focused on is how antiquated our U.S. industrial defense base is, and just how far behind we really are. I mean, we didn't know this, but we just found out over the last 2 to 3 years that we buy 22 key components that go into our most advanced weapon systems from known adversaries today. That supply chain, that feeds our Defense Department is so exposed. And so there's urgency, and now they've put dollars behind that urgency to try and shore that up and to try and secure that supply chain. So I don't know whether you touch defense at all. If you do, that's great. But if you also compete for things like copper or aluminum or any other materials, or if you've got kids, as I think back and I think about like Charles, and I think about the Chicago school district, and I think about kids trying to figure out what they want to do in their careers. There's an opportunity that's going to be emerging over the next 5 to 6 years at least for people to go into the manufacturing sector and to be able to support some of this build out. So there's lots of different ways to slice and dice it.
Yeah,
There's going
I
to be some
have a
low.
quick question if you can hear me. It's
You
okay.
bet, Brandon. Yeah, you bet.
Thanks. About the 100% depreciation, does that also count towards a facility? Meaning, if I buy a $10 million property to use as a manufacturing facility or as a warehousing facility, can I depreciate that in year one?
That's what I understand. Okay, now get tax advice from a professional, not from me,
Okay.
but yeah, but as I go in and I dive and I try to understand it, that's what I understand. That it does include the building. I'm not sure about the actual real estate, but it does include the building and improvements on the building and then the equipment that goes in it.
Okay. So instead of depreciating over 30 years or whatever it is normally,
Yep.
I could depreciate in year one. Okay, I'll double. I mean, yeah, there's a potential of that being the case. Well, we're not 100% yet. We'll see how it all unfolds, but there's a potential of that being the case.
Absolutely, and that's what I'm hearing. Like, we do a lot of work with in the construction sector, and so I work with a lot of GCs, and so they've been watching this, and they're pretty excited about it. They've got some pretty full pipelines, but now they think that their pipelines are going to get even, going to ratchet up quite a bit because of this. So, but yeah, double check. But every source I look at, every source I check and research, that's what I'm hearing.
Okay, great, thank you. So maybe we'll
Oh.
see an increase in real estate prices as well in that case.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't have it in this presentation, but we can certainly talk about it. There's been some interesting changes since the beginning of the year and where a lot of site selection, where that will happen. When we were coming into the end of last year, we saw typical site selection for manufacturing and industrial build out tied to things like just energy availability, the local cost of living, available real estate, distribution systems, those kinds of things that are kind of the old school typical ways you do site selection. But since since the new administration took office, one of the things that they're doing is in July and August, we believe Congress is going to be focused on reducing regulation. That's going to be the new focus. They got the bill behind them. They're going to let the administration worry about tariffs and trade agreements, but they're going to focus on reducing regulation. One of the things that they're going to do is allow natural gas plants to be placed on top of production zones. So think about West Virginia, for instance. West Virginia is not an area where we would have typically looked at for a big industrial build out area, right? It's difficult, distribution systems are challenging, et cetera. But they have tremendous natural gas resources there. And if they can put a large natural gas electrical plant right on top of that area, they're going to produce some of the cheapest electricity in the world. So if I'm a data center, or if I'm a high tech, anyone in robotics, anything along those lines, semiconductor manufacturing, now all of a sudden I can go locate my facility in and around that natural gas power plant, and my electricity is cheap. I've got decent distribution, weather conditions not that bad, and I've got a decent labor pool there. And so we're thinking that it changes a little bit of where this industrial capacity goes. So the upper Ohio Valley, up and down the I-35 corridor, across the Tennessee Valley, those areas that have really strong natural gas deposits are probably going to pick up a lion's share of where a lot of this new industrial capacity gets located. So we have to almost rethink kind of the national map a little bit and the way site selection and the way this industrial capacity is going to get rolled out. We'll learn more as companies actually make those announcements. But Brandon, I don't know where you're located, but it's going to be really interesting. And so I think everyone needs to dust off their strategic plans and kind of rethink things moving forward as we go over the next year or so.
Thank you. Thank
You
you.
bet.
So Keith, you're saying I was ahead of the time, ahead of the curve by moving and building a home on the side of a mountain here in West Virginia. Is that what you're saying?
There you go. What I'm saying is your world's about to get hectic, man. That little 5 minute commute or 10 minute commute that you had, yeah, you're gonna have to get used to that changing. And I think the dialect in West Virginia will change a little bit, you know.
Does that bring my Pittsburgh accent? For the record, I'm an hour away from the closest Chick-fil-A, so there you go.
Oh no, oh no. So the benefit for you is you might get Chick-fil-A in your backyard. You never know. I had a son-in-law who used to work up in West Virginia. He was in the oil industry, and yeah, so it's yeah, you guys are interesting up there. I'm just gonna say it that way. But it could be lots of opportunity there. So that's one area that got kind of called out. Okay, so a couple other things. There are some risks. I didn't talk a lot. I guess I got through most of this. Fossil fuel incentives, just watch for a shift between, again, what I just talked about, some of these investments in the fossil fuel industry and the traditional fossil fuels versus maybe what we were seeing with some of the green investments. Some of that will continue, but if it's wind farm related, it's going to face a little bit of pressure. Not this year, not next year, but you'll start to see that impact hit kind of in the next 2 to 3 years. On the risk side, yeah, we do have to worry about the deficit a little bit because it really does shift things, and they are rolling the dice that all this growth is going to end up offsetting the loss in tax revenue. So we'll see what happens there. It does impact some of the clean energy incentives. It does reduce those incentives in a lot of industries. So a lot of companies that had invested heavily are going to have to do some rethinking and maybe some new approaches to funding. We may see as government funding gets reduced or state and local level funding gets reduced in some ways, maybe a lot of those P3 projects where we have a lot of private investors and private entities and then the government collectively going together on a project. You may see some pullback there, but we'll see. We know that the stricter domestic content is really going to be a big deal. And we'll talk about that in tariffs, which I'm going to hit next. There are going to be some trim. We're going to see Medicaid and SNAP trimmed. There's no way around it. It's going to get trimmed. It will be for those people who probably should be working anyway. I know that's what the narrative is, and that's what they're talking about. But there is going to be a ripple effect there, and we're going to have to deal with that because there are going to be some families who are going to get caught up in this that shouldn't be, and we're going to need to help them. We're going to need to prop them up. No real major federal infrastructure grants that were as part of this big bill. We just didn't see a lot of that like you saw in maybe the infrastructure bill a couple years ago. Just not a lot of big, heavy infrastructure spending here. A lot of the infrastructure, they're going to count on states and private investment to be able to meet those needs. And then these labor pressures. So again, we're going to watch that rush to start a lot of these projects. And I think we're going to have a tight labor market as a result of that. So tariffs. Okay, we're going to talk about tariffs for a second. And I'm just going to say right now, big, who knows, right? When it comes to it. Just real quick background. So on April 2nd, a lot of us thought what was coming was a 10% universal base tariff and then maybe China getting a 30% tariff. The Trump administration used a clause under an Emergency Powers Act, basically saying that they were fighting fentanyl imports from China and from a lot of other markets, that it was a national emergency, that we were losing, 100,000 people a year, which is true, to fentanyl, and that they had to stop the supply and the flow of fentanyl into the United States, had to cut that off. They then said tariffs are a key mechanism to do that. And what happened was we had a lower court, which is wasn't international, but it was a U.S. Foreign trade court that ruled that tariffs don't stop fentanyl from coming into the United States. So the administration overstepped its legal authority, and therefore the reciprocal tariffs were illegal. So there are all kinds of different tariffs. So like the Section 232 on aluminum and steel are a national security imposed tariff that's under congressional control. They're harder to put into place. They require significant research and investment and time and energy and bipartisan support to be able to put those into place. Once they're put into place, the president can kind of ratchet up and move up and down the percentages on those tariffs. That's why those Section 232 tariffs bounce around a little bit, but they're only on specific products, and that's all they stay on. What the administration did, though, is they created these reciprocal tariffs, which hit a lot of countries, and with the lower tax court or lower trade court basically calling them illegal, what the Trump administration did is they said, okay, we're going to appeal it to the U.S. Court of Appeals. U.S. Court of Appeals said, we will allow you to keep the reciprocal tariffs in place while we rule on the lower court finding. So the U.S. Court of Appeals, critical in all this, is that they should have a ruling sometime after August 1st, sometime in the first week of August. So when you hear the Trump administration right now talking to all these countries and saying basically, hey, if you don't get a deal done by August 1st, we're going to go throw a huge reciprocal tariff at you. They're counting on the fact that pressure is going to get these countries to do their deal before the U.S. Court of Appeals rules on the reciprocal tariffs. That's what this is all about. And what they're after is not necessarily negotiating tariffs. That's not what they're negotiating right now. The tariff is the mechanism. That's the hammer. What they're really negotiating is the non-tariff trade barriers that are in place. We estimate our own analysis, we can find what we think is somewhere between 350 and 450 billion dollars in US trade exports that are being prevented today because of silly little things like a US shipment of products will get to a port in a foreign territory, and all of a sudden they say, hey, we have different customs inspection processes, so we need to hold your shipment up at the port while you go file these new forms that you didn't know you needed to file, and we're going to hold your shipment up at the port for 30, 90, 60 days. And for a lot of companies, after they go through that once, they're like, ooh, forget this. I'm not doing this again. And so they stop exporting. So that's why, like today, you hear the administration saying, we don't sell US cars in Japan. Well, theoretically, it's the truth. Even though we theoretically could be doing that, there's so many non-tariff trade barriers that it doesn't make sense for a company to try and do it. And so what they're trying to do is get those pieces of the trade barriers removed so that it opens up those markets. The other thing I'd say real fast before I move on is tariffs are a swipe on, swipe off event, right? Right now, until the US Court of Appeals rules, president can do just what he did last night. And you say, you know what, I'm ticked off at Canada, 35% tariffs as of August 1st, or I can impose them today. I can also wipe them out tomorrow. Um, and we saw that with China, 145%. Okay, well, no, 55. Okay, no, 35. You're all over the place. And what they're doing is using it as a negotiation because the new administration, whoever comes in next, could simply wipe every tariff out. What has stickiness, though, are these non-tariff trade barriers that they get removed as part of a trade agreement. Those trade agreements are very complex. They typically take 3 to 5 years to negotiate under normal circumstances, and we're trying to cram it into 90 days. They're typically 1,000 pages long, and they typically have, dozens of negotiators and hundreds of attorneys for each country. And we're trying to slam all these agreements down into 90 days and to try and get the stickiness around these trade agreements that creates a little permanence that a lot of us as business executives, right, we can count on that permanence of those trade agreements, and then we can make long-term decisions based on it. And so that's what the fight is over. That's what the debate is over. Once we get past August, once these trade deals are in place, a lot of the tariffs will be knocked back down to the 10, 15, 20% range like we saw with Vietnam. But it's this negotiation that's happening out in the public press, right? We're finally seeing what used to happen behind closed doors. Now we're seeing it right in the face of a camera. And it doesn't feel good. We don't like it. And it makes it hard to make a decision right now. And it has ripple effects all the way through the economy. One big thing is it does have a real effect. Like even if US copper tariffs don't stay at 50%, after August 1st, they're having their impact. I mean, copper prices just hit new all-time highs, up 34% year to date, up almost 20% year over year. And the reason why is because every copper buyer in the world went out and bought as much inventory as they could find leading up until July. Now we're short on copper. We don't have enough copper in the world. And so the administration's hoping that we can start up, U.S. domestic copper production, but that's a 2 to 3 year timeline, so it's going to take a while. So we're dealing with these kinds of things. The one last thought I want to give to you on tariffs before we move on to something else is that we're going to have to approach the world on a more secular basis when we think about the economy, and we think about impacts to industries. You all represent a very diverse group of executives on this call, right? You're in all different industries. You have similar stories when it comes to labor and some core fundamentals of doing business, but your businesses and where you work are very different. So I could ask all of you to say, hey, copper tariffs have an impact on you. And, Charles would say, yeah, probably not. Brandon may say, absolutely killing me. And that's what we're going to go through is we're going to go through those kinds of stories throughout the economy over the next year. And so you're going to hear, depending on, what agenda somebody has, you're going to hear the horror stories, or you're going to hear the absolute, unicorns and rainbows story from others, depending on just what story they want to tell. You got to dive into the data and really look at where the real impacts are. And so this is one of them that's negative. And I don't know if I have a trade. Yeah. So a couple more things. We do economic analysis. And one of the things that we're looking at is when all the smoke clears after August 1st, Okay, so let's say all the trade deals are done. We see the Vietnam's at 20% tariffs, and China maybe comes in at 30, and the UK was at 10. You know, you see these varied tariffs. When we take all those tariffs collectively and we look at the products that they're on and the amount that we import into the US, and we look at that blended tariff rate, so an average tariff rate across all those countries, if it comes in somewhere between 8 and 12% net, okay, US GDP this year should grow closer to 2% and next year accelerate to 2.3. Okay, so remember, we're running about 2.6 in Q2 without the tariff impact. But at 8 to 12% blended, we are going to be in this range. That does not include anything that I talked about in the big Build Back Better deal or whatever they're calling it, the big beautiful bill. Doesn't include any of those impacts of all those tax cuts and that $780 billion in consumer spending, all that stuff. That's not in this number, but that's the impact. But what I wanted to show you is this. When that number goes from 8 to 12% to just 15 to 18%, and right now we're running about an 18% blended tariff rate because of what we did to Vietnam, what we've done to others. GDP drops this year to about 1.2%, which actually makes the Fed estimate, remember that, at 1.4%, actually makes it look a little bit hot. So the Fed is probably a little bit right based on what they're seeing with tariff. But then look what happens next year. Next year, we go from almost a 2.4, 2.5% growth rate to barely breaking even, and maybe the economy struggles. So now again, that razor thin margin, that razor thin difference is what we've got to watch. And I just heard this morning, right before we jumped on this call, that the administration is considering a new universal base tariff of 15 to 20% instead of 10%. And so that would break that threshold and that would kick us into this realm. Now, before I move on, right, this is confusing stuff. I know we're all dealing with it. We're all trying to get through it. What we're seeing in the marketplace right now today is we've got a number of Chinese firms that, as I said earlier on, are giving super large discounts to any buyer that's willing to purchase products. And so we're starting to see 55% discounts on those products. Now, how long those Chinese manufacturers can keep that up by trimming their margins that thin, we don't know. We don't know if it's just, you know, 1 quarter or if it could be this way and sustained for the next several years. If that's the case, if foreign suppliers from around the world are trimming their margins, and if they're finding a little bit of cost savings, like maybe by moving it by ocean maritime freight and getting another discount from their ocean maritime firm, or a little bit of a depreciation in that currency against the dollar, those things can wipe out a 10 to 12 to 15% tariff pretty quick. A little bit of a challenge wiping out a 20% tariff, but that's also possible. Okay. So from the administration's perspective, if they're sitting here looking at an additional 300 to 500 to maybe $1 trillion in tariff income, and it doesn't get passed to the consumer, why wouldn't they do it? And that's kind of where they're at. That's where they're thinking. You know, already to date, it looks like when we get through July, they will have taken in somewhere between 300 and 350 billion in tariff income. And we're not yet seeing the impact at an inflation level. We're not seeing it yet in GDP impacts. We're just not seeing it yet. And as we talked about earlier, you know, maybe it's just not here yet. Maybe we've got to wait for Q3 and Q4 for those price impacts to hit. But offsetting that right now are all of these anecdotes that we're getting about supplier discounting, helping us move these products in that wipe out the impact of the tariff. So that's kind of where we are. That's a lot.
Hey Keith,
Yeah.
how are you seeing people go about, I guess in all of those areas, right? Whether it's getting stuff like cargo, more of it on the ocean, bigger discounts with manufacturers. What are you seeing kind of as the lever being used the most with people and with brands, I guess?
Yeah, I'm hearing a little bit of everything. So
You are.
getting discounts from the suppliers are really where they're all going
Okay.
because they are kind of opening up. And I'll show you right here real fast, Courtney, that India right now is one of the biggest benefactors of what's going on with the China tariff. We see a lot of shifting of sourcing to India. And this is a PMI. It's real simple. Just anything over 50 is an expanding manufacturing market. Anything under 50 is contracting. So India right now is the big winner. So a lot of those companies that were sourcing from China, if that Chinese supplier is not giving them the biggest discounts to be able to offset the tariff, they're like, oh, I'm off to India. I'm
Yeah.
gonna go there. Or they were doing Vietnam, they were doing South Korea. Some of those markets are struggling a little bit, so we don't see that shift as much. But that's kind of what they're doing. They're also putting a lot of pressure on the maritime firms, right? And I know I said
Yeah.
that. Yeah, using a lot of foreign trade zones, hoping that the tariffs go away. You see a lot of those levers being pulled right now. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of them take advantage of currency exchange rates and trying to do using the currency, not manipulation, but trying to
Yeah.
play currency markets, that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah.
But then I'm hearing some that are basically like, you know what? I'm not getting discounts from my suppliers. The tariff is so expensive, I can't order that product, and so I'm doing nothing. I'm sitting. I'm gonna sit on
Hmm.
existing inventories. I'm gonna wait. And if
Yeah.
I get, yeah, and if I get past August and I don't like what I see, then maybe I have to bite the bullet. But for now, I'm waiting. And that's kind of the big thing that we're seeing. Let me show you over here real fast. And this is cool. I love these audibles. Um, this is the cost to ship a container between various markets in the world. We use it as kind of a proxy between volume and understanding how much volume is coming out. Look at these numbers. So, any of you managing a supply chain right now, if you're not going in and getting these discounts, you need to be. This is the spot market. So, right now, a lot of spot prices are running under contract prices. And so, right now, like the global composite index is down 55% from where it was a year ago. And just between the beginning of July and the latest week we have data available, down 5% week over week. So what we were looking at, like kind of Courtney, to your question, we thought what had happened, and we know this is for a fact, we saw a lot of companies that had ordered products and the manufacturer in China was ready to ship it. And they called up real quick when they started getting the tariff risk and they said, whoa, 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 hold it, hold it, hold it, just freeze
Yeah.
it. Yeah, freeze it at the port or freeze it at a bonded warehouse and just hold on to it. I own it, but hold on to it. I'll inbound it when I can. Once they got that 90-day hiatus, they went ahead and said, okay, send it and we'll go ahead and pay the tariff. Um, what happened then was we got that wave. We got that wave that started in early June. And so we have all that freight on water that should be hitting the West Coast sometime in the next couple weeks. And we think it'll probably end by the end of July. But what we're not seeing is anything chasing it, right? So we don't see, when I look at this data over here and I read all these reports, I don't see any new order growth. So even in the US, we see some decent growth overall in manufacturing, but new orders are sluggish, and they were sluggish through June. Canada and Mexico both talking about new orders plummeting. China's talking about new orders being way down seasonally, right? They're not seeing that seasonal boost or that lift. Japan, same thing. Every one of these markets, other than India, I'm not seeing any market around the world that's saying they're really seeing an increase in new orders. So that tells us that everyone shipped in that wave and then they just hit the big pause button. They hit a timeout and they're just sitting and doing nothing. If you look at Shanghai to LA right now, you can ship a container in 60% cheaper than you could a year ago. And Shanghai
Yeah.
to New York about 48%. So how are, I mean, just tell me real quick, Courtney, how are you seeing things?
I'm feeling this savings right here that we're looking at now, but more on the air freight side right now. So, which has been great. Um, and are most of our stuff is coming actually in and out of Indonesia. So that's actually been recently, there's been a change there in the rates and whatnot. So, but we haven't, I mean, we're growing. And so we haven't had the luxury of saying, okay, let's pause. Like, so we're just keeping things moving. And the biggest thing has been, negotiating with the supply chain, with the freight forwarding companies. And then we do have a decent amount of stuff coming in and out of China and as the second biggest country, I would say. And that's one that I think like from a supplier standpoint that we absolutely need to be going after like some sort of discount in. So that's kind of what I was asking. I'm like, and everyone that you're talking to, like what are the kind of primary, secondary levers that they're trying to go after, or is it kind of all of them in a mixed bag? So we're kind of taking that mixed bag approach depending on the product and what country of origin it's at.
Yeah, and you're doing the right thing. And what I'm hearing is actually some companies are actually coming out post-tariff better than they were going in.
Yeah.
Their actual total landed cost is lower than prior to the tariff because they're doing exactly what you're saying. They're getting real aggressive and they're pressuring the suppliers and they're
Yeah.
pressuring the maritime companies and they're pressuring their freight forwarders and it just trickles down. And by the time they add all those savings up, they're like, whoa, we just
Yeah.
landed it cheaper than we were before. I was just going to point out to you real quick, Indonesia, I don't know what your specific suppliers are looking like, but right now that market is decelerating. So those manufacturers should
Yeah.
be feeling a lot of pain right now, and they should be willing to really negotiate on those discounts.
Perfect.
So, not telling you what to do, right?
Yeah.
But you hear me.
I'm headed over there in a couple weeks. So
There you
for
go.
all the right reasons that we're talking about, and meeting the
There
freight
you
forwarding company there as well.
Yeah. Look them in the face and use a
Yeah,
little bit of
exactly.
that Northeast accent and just, say,
Exactly.
you bigger, better deal. Come on, man. Okay. So a couple other things on the supply chain. Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. I saw something pop over here in the chat, and a couple people had to drop for meetings, but that's
Keith,
cool.
how accessible is that PMI chart on a regular basis to everyone?
Well, okay, so this is updated monthly, right?
Okay.
And so every one of these reports, we go collect them. I like to use S&P Global, and I go get them from there.
Okay.
I promised in this forum not to sell. I do cover these in our newsletters when we do
Okay.
these, we
Oh, I
send
see that
newsletter out.
S&P Global, that where it is now right now. Okay, got it.
Exactly. Yeah. So
Gotcha.
so that's the best way to go read the full report is to go check
Yep.
that out, and they'll have a lot of details in there about new orders and what's going on with it. So I would definitely go pull that Indonesia report and I'd read through it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that'll be good leverage for you when you walk in. And I mean, same thing with China. A lot of these
Yeah.
surveys are conducted privately, so you don't get a lot of government influence on them. That's why I like them. I feel like they're fairly accurate. So.
And Courtney and anyone else on the call that would like a subscription to Armada's flagship brief, which is, this PMI report's in there and just so much else. It's jam-packed. Reach out to me and I'll buy that on behalf of the CO forum for your benefit.
Awesome.
We'll pay, so.
Yeah. Did I hear someone else with a question out there?
Yeah. Hey, Keith, I got to drop at 10:30, so I'm sorry.
That's all right,
But
buddy.
this is great information. My question though, and I hate to take us back, is on the Medicaid piece.
Yeah.
Because that one gives me really a lot of pause here, because
Yeah.
we use Medicaid in the education sector really for to service students with disabilities.
Yeah.
So it's for our school nurses, our counselors, our therapists, and I'm just worried about the reduced Medicaid funding that will really force schools to cut staff. Is there another source that I can go to find out more information about what's real, what's not real, or are things kind of, from what your perspective, set in stone right now?
Well, no, I think in the bill they probably laid things out and tried to put as many provisions around it as we can, but I think it's going to be case law. So I
Sure.
think, yeah. So if you hear me, I think what we're going to learn is that they didn't think everything through. They sped it through, and they're going to have to make adjustments to it as we roll on. So it's going to be real important for folks like you, I think, to go find, that lobbying entity where you can make sure you get in the White House's ear and let them know that maybe something's too tight. They're going to have to loosen up some of the restrictions here, because I know they say they're only going after folks that should have the capacity and the wherewithal to go out and work, even on a temporary basis. But and I know, I mean, healthcare, my gosh, if I've got a single mom who's able to go work and I put that provision on her, but she can't go afford daycare, it impacts that household. And so I think there's going to be a lot of those kinds of cases that really are going to have to work through. And unfortunately, like I said, it's going to be case law. So I wish I had a specific entity for you, but there's got to be some national lobbying efforts out there. Maybe even state of Illinois has got some folks that at a national level can kind of sound the bell. And I know you've got a lot of resources through, education and through the, various entities that I kind of have, they kind of help you through that. So,
Yeah, thanks for that.
yeah, I didn't help you much there, my friend. But, what's that? Oh.
No, nothing. I got to drop, but thanks so much, Keith.
Okay, yeah, you bet. Take care. Take care. Okay, so I know folks are having to drop. Let me jump to a couple of things I did want to kind of get a point, get across. Anyone managing a supply chain, we're still watching the Red Sea very carefully. We did have two ships sunk down in the choke point down here in the Gulf of Aden near the Red Sea. That is the conduit through the Suez Canal, and that particular choke point right now, I would imagine the next action you're going to see with the U.S. and Israel is going to be right here in Yemen, hitting Houthi rebels. We already hit a lot of their infrastructure. The problem with the Houthi rebels and the problem with completely opening that channel up, and the reason why we haven't been able to do it thus far is that there aren't specific targets. The targets are in schoolyards and in hospitals, and it's like a terrorist organization. They're embedded in the local community. So what do you hit? And I think that's the big problem. And no one wants to put boots on the ground there. So this is going to continue to be a choke point. Big thing is it really added about 11 days to global shipping, and it adds almost $3.5 million per voyage when a ship has to go like from Asia to the EU and it has to go around the southern tip of Africa and back up into those markets. And so we also think they added about a $6 per barrel premium on oil right now. So if they do get that opened up and we do see ships transiting, that will again completely change maritime costs, should see even deeper discounts from what we see right now. So keep monitoring that. We monitor it all the time. Right now, it's kind of getting ratcheted up a little bit. Again, supply chain costs, this is our forecast. This is the first forecast I'm showing you. We get these from, actually, John Nelson is our partner in this, and they do some advanced modeling for us. And right now, this forecast is showing a big impact, increase in trucking activity and volume. And this suggests that we're going to have broader demand in the marketplace, which is a really good signal overall, but it also means some of your costs are going to go up domestically. So you're going to want to watch that. Rail freight intermodal, again, still getting some positive signals. I'm not seeing any deep dives, like recessionary, nothing falling off a cliff right now. And a lot of these particular models are running 95, 96, 97% accurate 6 months out. So we've got a lot of confidence in them. And as you can see, if we do hit these, this looks like a fairly flat curve. But historically, if you look over here, you can see that if we hit those intermodal levels in 2026, they're almost historic. So it's a significant amount of volume running through those industries. Air cargo, then, as Courtney was talking about, Courtney, we're seeing a little bit of a dip. We just got an up cycle, sort of I don't know, an up signal, if you will. And right now the models are kind of showing this increase, and we're starting to see, maybe a little bit of an uptick, but still below where you've been over the last couple of years. So that's why you're feeling a little bit of relief. Retail spending, then, again, we're talking about 70% of GDP, and right now our forecast, which is still bad, about 95% accuracy, still showing a good uptick. And this is what we would call an upward bias, kind of a growth bias. And you can see it over here that total spending looks like it's still going to hit all-time highs. One of the things that this does, again, one of our jobs is to connect dots for folks. And as we try to connect the dots, the one thing I'm concerned about is that, remember when I was talking to Courtney about supply chain management, how a lot of firms are holding off on new orders. We're kind of running off of existing inventories. And as we deplete those inventories, there's not a lot of new orders chasing them to replenish that stock. And what we're getting is a good consumption curve. So even though inventories are going down or maybe getting thinner, we're about to get a pretty good retail signal, which means we're going to get a lot of sell through, which ultimately could lead to some stock out issues. So when we get into late Q3 and Q4, depending on, it doesn't matter what part of the marketplace you're in, there's enough volatility in the supply chain. I think our narrative shifts from having overstocks to kind of worrying about stock outs. So this isn't advice for you to go out and buy all your Christmas gifts early. I'm not saying that. I don't work for the Retail Federation, but you might watch them a little bit. So
Keith, a question for you on the retail side.
yeah.
There's so much choice out there with products like, just in building this home, I can do a Google search and there isn't like one or two or three suppliers like there used to be. I can find 15 suppliers. Like there's the Chinese market, the secondary market, and supplying some of these products for these homes. I mean, could it just mean scaling down some of those options when we say stock outs? Like, maybe some suppliers that aren't as well funded or manufacturers aren't as well funded or whatnot. we lose them from the marketplace, but overall, I'm going from 13 different sources of supply to 5. I mean, can it look like that as well?
You could see consolidation. I think what we're really going to see is the differences between those who can really manage their supply chain and maybe those who don't. Used to, there's a lot of leeway in the supply chain where you can make some mistakes and still recover. But we may be getting to a point with tariffs now where if you don't make the right decisions, you're going to get caught out, and competitively you could lose.
Yeah.
Those are a couple of things we're watching now. The Trump administration imposed that heavy tariff on de minimis shipments. So like the Temus of the world, where you were ordering online from Temu and it was shipping direct from China to your house, that's been impacted by that de minimis tariff. And so finally, those shipments are getting hit with that extra tariff, and they're having to completely rethink those supply chains. So they're restaging products in the United States, but they're still paying a tariff. There's just a lot of workaround and a lot of shuffling and a lot of aggressive, action being taken place right now as those companies are trying to figure out how they're going to deal with that. In the meantime, what's happened is what you're seeing is maybe some better prices on the internet from some domestic suppliers that you weren't expecting. And that's why we see, remember in the US, in my PMI chart, we saw US manufacturing, second best in the world. It is because some people, some buyers are shifting their attention to US suppliers, where it makes sense. So, yeah, good question. Here's just what we're showing in general merchandisers right now. This is a busy chart. I'm not going to take the time I know we're getting tight on time. I'm not going to take the time to go over it, but just wanted to show you that this is a comparison in the inventory to sales ratios. So this is just how effectively companies are managing their inventories relative to sales volumes. And the ISRs we watch because we just went through a 24-month supply chain recession, right? So it's like a freight recession is what we called it, where carriers, trucking companies, and air cargo carriers and everyone were really scrambling to keep the doors open. We actually lost yellow transportation as a result of that. So one of the biggest bankruptcies in history, especially in transportation. But we've been through that process because inventories coming out of the 2021, 2022 period got so bloated and so overstocked that we weren't really ordering anything. We weren't moving anything over the last 24 months. Well, now we finally balanced those inventories out. But then with tariffs, we've been, some companies have really over ordered, some have not. So this helps us understand where the overstocks are. And what we're looking at right now is any industry that's sitting about 3% higher than they were prior to the decade average, prior to the pandemic. So I would take that decade between the Great Recession and the pandemic, and we average that out. Any company that's sitting about 3% higher than that is technically overstocked. And so you see this group of companies or industries here that are sitting heavy. But what I'm not getting, and what we thought where the over ordering was things like general merchandisers like Walmart, or furniture and appliance stores. We thought we would see overstocks there, but they're still sitting. Walmart and Target and those others are sitting almost 10% lighter than they were, and they're 6% lighter than they were at the same point in time in 2019. So that overbuilding of inventories is not happening yet. That's why I'm a little worried as we go into the fall, go into Q3, go into Q4, that these companies, these industries that are sitting light already through May, as they see that sell through and we see the construction industry take off and we see manufacturing take off and you get that consumption and the US consumer at the retail level is still spending, we've got some concerns about those stockouts hitting these industries. So if you rely on these companies, that's worth a phone call to those suppliers to say, just trying to get an idea of how you're sitting on inventories. Are you reordering? Are you replenishing? What's your strategy? And that's honest. That's an honest discussion that you should be having overall. And then these down here are sitting heavy. So, alcohol, I'm not drinking enough. They're overstocked, 30% heavier. I got to do my part, I guess. But then we see a lot of these industries down here, Home Depots of the world, really built up inventories, and you see it, some other sectors there. So I wanted to get that out and make sure you understood that. Last couple things, I'm not going to go through. So residential construction or non-res, we talked about being really strong. That's where that 5 trillion and 10 trillion start to kick in, and it's all front loaded. And so we're going to watch this and see if it explodes like we expect. Construction activity and manufacturing, you can see it here. We're cranking out 4 times the amount of industrial capacity and new construction projects that we did prior to the pandemic. For comparison, again, we're building out right now at about 234 billion. When we adjust for differences in currency, Mexico, for comparison, is only building at about a $70 billion annual rate. India, as I said, a lot of that shifting of manufacturing going to India, they're only building out at about 70 billion a year. So at 234, we're dusting both of those countries in US build out. It doesn't feel like it, but that's the reality of what's happening. And then you throw another 5 trillion and, Trump administration thinking it's 8 to 10, who knows? 5 trillion is too much because that suddenly takes, and if it's all front loaded, yeah, that takes 234 and cranks it up to 700, 800, a trillion a year. And, that puts this chart way up here somewhere, even higher than that. So we'll see. I mean, those are just some interesting challenges. Residential market, though, for everything I said early on, remember, the reason why I did that thing up front about the Federal Reserve is to tie it all together. We're still not seeing those interest rates being cut, and so we're seeing a weaker housing market. And that does have a negative drag on the economy. It's about 16% of GDP in a fully mature housing market. So they are worried about this, and this is why President Trump is on Jerome Powell at the Federal Reserve so hard, and why he's calling him names and trying to get him to start dropping interest rates, because he's worried about 16% of his economy that's going into recessionary looking trends. And if we lose a housing market, that feels very 2007-ish, and we don't want that. And so that's why he's putting so much pressure back on the Federal Reserve to say, look, I can see the signals, you can see the signals, we see the data, pay attention to the right data and start cutting, and so that's where we are. Manufacturing again, I'm just watching my time. I'm getting kind of tight here, but we're growing still, and the forecast here could get blown way out, just depending on what we see with some of the tariffs through August 1st. So I guess if I'm saying anything here, it's just circle August 1st, because I think that's going to be a critical time for us overall. Okay, wanted to get to this slide real fast. So here's new thinking on what happens with AI and the impact on labor. So here's what happened to. I'm going to give you a little backstory. We're going to go backwards here. So we got the June payroll data, and the June payroll data was okay. I mean, 147,000 jobs created, a little hotter than expected. And we can see some sectors were growing, some were dropping. But what got us was we had a net loss in business and professional business jobs for the first time in going back like 7, 8, 9 years, maybe further. We saw that dip and we're like, what is going on? Is it the economy or is it something else? And what we're learning is that we have trimmed about 350,000 jobs out of the economy based on the shift to AI over the last 6 months. We weren't able to track it before. Now we can finally get our hands around the data, and we're learning that many job losses based on that. And so, the keys of the world panicked, and we're like, oh my gosh, here we go. It's AI is hitting and the market's going to collapse and blah, 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 blah. So we had to dive in and do the research and take the time to get it right. So over the next 10 years, between now and 2030, baby boomer retirement is going to hit about 21, almost 22 million workers. We think we're going to only add new entrants at the rate of about 2.3 million, even if we allow immigration to accelerate under green card, and visa programs. You're still looking at only maybe recovering somewhere between 5 and 7 million workers. So AI job losses, we're projecting at about 4 million over the next 5 years, over that period of time. And AI will create about 1 million new jobs and, just AI management and things like that. So net 3 million job loss here. But when you take all that and you add it all up and you crunch it, we still are going to be losing about 18 million workers. And right now, we've got job openings of about 7.6 million. So as managers, as parents, as educators, one of the things we're gonna have to manage through over the next 6 months is the lag time between these boomer retirements and the speed with AI adoption, because AI is going to be getting rid of those 4 million pretty fast. Boomer retirements, boomers are hanging on longer than normal. And so there's this lag where eventually by the end of the decade, we're going to have this huge gap. But in the near term, over the next 6 to 12 months, we could be seeing this net reduction in jobs that feels bad. It feels concerning. We're going to read it as the economy's collapsing, when it's really all just this transition between generational transitions, technology transitions, and what looks like maybe the industry trying to build out and do some things. And I don't want to get into like conspiracy theories, but one of the reasons why the Trump administration is trying to deport so fast is because they know this 4 million is coming fast. And they know that there's going to be a shift in jobs and job responsibilities that are going to come as a result of that. And I think one of the things that they're trying to do is slow it down in the near term and create that capacity to be able to let people shift to different occupations as they lose those jobs. But then know that you've got to keep the visa program in place and you've got to allow good immigration or the right kind of immigration over the longer period, over the next 3 to 4 to 5 years and beyond. There's a lot there, and we're still unwrapping this. I mean, literally, a lot of this data we just put together in the last 2 weeks. So this is all brand new. But a lot of it comes out of, I'm going to jump over here because I am running out of time, but I want to jump out of here real quick because I was just at a transportation conference, and trucking companies are some of the oldest out there. They're old school, man. I mean, it's like pick it up in one point and deliver it at another point, right? So we had Pitt, Ohio, Echo Global Logistics in there. And it was fascinating because they were talking about 8 months ago, AI wasn't even on the radar. And today, okay, one of them is looking at replacing over 50%, or I'm sorry, 80% of their back office employees through attrition between now and the end of the year. Between the end of the year, 80%. And this is an old school trucking company that really didn't believe in a lot of technology. They're all about that human interaction between each other. And that's the amount of benefit they're going to get in trimming their overhead and trimming their headcount, just using attrition to do it. They don't even have to lay off, but AI is kind of replacing it. But what I thought was even more fascinating, though, was that one of the companies told a story about how they started to implement this. And so for those of you who haven't started it yet, I just want to tell you this one quick story. Echo Global Logistics is one of them where they went in and they said the most important thing to do is to start small, smart with a tiny little application. It's easy to write, it's inexpensive, and it literally, if you don't like it or if the customers don't like it, you can shift gears, you can tune it in a matter of just a few days rather than taking months to do it. And one of the applications they talked about is they said that when a customer calls in and says, hey, I have a problem with my shipment, I can't find it. Or I'm sorry, not when they call in, when they send an email in, they said, we were sitting in our reps were going through and they're reading the email and they're getting the company information, they're taking the company information, and they're hitting one of 5 different databases, and they could have pulled any of 20 different types of data to then go answer that email. So they wrote a very simple app that uses AI, and the AI goes in and reads the email, pulls all the critical information out, goes to those 5 different databases, and it just automatically goes and pulls the same 20 pieces of data pertinent to that shipment and to that email and to that client, and drops it into a simple little pop-up box that comes up for that employee, and it happens almost instantaneously. So the minute that rep opens that email, that box pops up and they can sit and answer that question right away using that box. All the data is right there that they need. And they said that it has trimmed their workforce or improved utilization, improved productivity by numbers they can't even, they don't like. The percentages that they're getting back are unbelievable, right? It's like 80-90% increases in productivity. And so as they see attrition, they're realizing that I don't really need to backfill that position because the reps that I've got are doing so much more with their time that they've got spare time, using them for other things. And they're still keeping that human interaction between themselves and their customers. But that's how they decided to do it. They started with that one little application, and then they sat back and they said, oh, you know what? Well, we could branch off of that. We could go do this and do this and do this and do this. And so they're just doing those small little applications. The areas where companies fail the most is trying to say, I'm going to implement AI across the whole organization, and we're just going to start using it. And that's not how to be successful at it. So the other thing too is just acknowledge the fact I love this first thing. So employees are 3 times more likely to use AI for about 30% of their daily work tasks, and their bosses don't even know it. Their bosses think it's about 4%. So I thought that was kind of funny, but anyway, you can see all the data there. Any questions about AI? I mean, that's the reason why I asked the question up front. I was kind of curious about who's in it and who's not. And I know we've lost a lot of folks, but I just thought that was fascinating. Here's an old world, old school company. And I will say this, everyone on this panel, I got to talk to them privately after the event. I was speaking at it, and they said, Keith, if they're not anyone in the room that wasn't really actively implementing AI, we're going to be able to kick their butt, and they're not going to be here in 18 months. And that's partially because they're trimming so much of their back office, they're trimming costs, they're getting so much more efficient, they're taking those cost savings advantages and using them as a competitive leverage to drop pricing on the market. And anyway, it's just opening up so many opportunities, and it's coming so fast. And so that's the reason why I asked the question. But okay.
I can't wait for our AI training. I need to learn how, because I have so many stupid little processes like that I can fix. I just need to know how to build that simple little app. How to, it's
Yeah.
the execution that the story sounds amazing. I'm missing that first step. Like how?
Exactly.
It's
And you know what's amazing? Connie, the person who did this, like down here at Echo, they didn't even have an IT background. They went ahead and they found a great partner. So that's the one thing, right? So it does cost a little bit of money. They found a great
Yep.
partner, but what normally was going to be 18 to 24 months of like build time, they were able to build it in like a week and a half, and using AI and AI programming. And then they went in and they said, okay, there's a couple things here that don't work. They did like little instant surveys and like these things don't work. They were able to fix the things that didn't work with like in like 36 hours. It was ridiculous. Um, but they're even saying now, like from a sales perspective, like you could go introduce something to customers. It takes 3, 4 days to develop that application, test it with them. And if they like it, great. If they don't, ditch it. And you're not really out anything. The other thing is they can go in and say, customer may look at it and go, wow, if it had such and such, I'd really appreciate that. And literally 2, 3, 4 days later, they can come right back and say, okay, what about now? So it's almost like you could do the market testing and the development just side by side, and you're not out the time and the expense and the waste of what we would have gone through a year ago.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
If you get that name of that good AI partner,
pass it on, right?
yes,
If you
absolutely.
if you email me, I can make some introductions. I know some people.
Absolutely. I'll email
Perfect.
you right now, Brandon. Thank you.
Thank you. I
Connie,
have my email address, so I could put it in the chat.
yeah, Connie, I just also sent you a direct message. I've got some as well. We've done some really cool stuff over the last 2 years that are massively impacts to our day-to-day stuff. So
Yeah, even our Jill Tirolo, our Austin in Texas director, they've done some amazing work at Rollick. So we're going to be wrapping up a lot of that internal knowledge that we have at the COO Forum, combined with Jeff Woods and his company to bring out some amazing training and a huge benefit to all of our members. The survey that we just did on AI, Keith, you'll find this interesting. Over 62% of the respondents, the COOs, say that they either lead or co-lead their AI efforts within the organization. So a large percentage of our members are the ones like Connie have to figure it out, right?
Yep.
So
Absolutely. And you guys are in the right position. I mean, you got the whole operational construct. You also have those ties into marketing and customers and the impact there. And I'm sure you got someone from finance you're tapping into and working with you if you don't have that responsibility. But man, yeah, I don't think in my career I can remember anything that was as impactful moving as fast.
yeah,
And
yeah,
you know and I'm preaching to the choir. This part of my presentation will have to go away in about 2 months because everyone will be like, yeah, whatever, we get it. Half of you, 50% of you are already there.
yeah.
So the other thing I want you to watch, lastly, I'm gonna close with this, is, okay, I know we laugh about robots and stuff, but we've got brand new data out that says that by the year 2030, 5 years from now, 1 in 3 households are going to have a personal robot, and it's going to be a bipedal robot like Optimus. It's about 40 million robots, and the biggest driver of that, remember the baby boomer generation and the retirements there? Like my mom is a perfect example where she's 85, lives on a small farm by herself. She's very agile. She gets out. She still likes to mow. She can do all those things. But I need just somebody who can kind of sit and kind of monitor things and sweep the floors, do some things that she doesn't like to do. But before I would think about moving her into like independent living or assisted living, which is going to be, 35, 45, $50,000 a year, suddenly at that price point, a $30,000 robot that would be a one-time expense, then some maintenance, but maybe last me 5 to 10 years, helping mom do all those things and allowing her to stay in her house, all of a sudden that's a no-brainer investment. That is a no-brainer investment. As long as it works the way they say it works. I don't know if you've watched the videos of Optimus, but just like AI, it is frightening how fast they're changing. There was videos that were taken at the beginning of the year of Optimus moving, and it moved like an old man. It was clunky and everything. Now, videos of Optimus, it's almost breakdancing, but that's how fast it has transitioned from something that's learning to something that's absolutely becoming way more effective. I watched a supply chain manager on an assembly line, and they were showing one of their robots just pulling parcels off of the assembly line and separating them by color and by shape and texture and everything and moving them down a conveyor belt. And it stood there, and they showed it early on, and it dropped 9, 10 packages on the floor, and it was just moving very slowly. By the time I saw the video just 30 days ago, it's working with both hands. It had 100% accuracy rate, and it was doing so many different tasks. Doesn't take vacation, all that kind of stuff. I'm not talking about job replacement. I'm talking about enhancing the workplace. And that's kind of the way we're thinking about these things. But more importantly, enhancing what, household quality of life. I mean, that sounds a lot like maybe where some of the stuff will end up. But I would just say, it's kind of feel weird to be walking down the street and to have a robot walk by me, but we're getting there. We're getting there. And I don't know whether to talk to it or call it I don't know what to do with it.
Hey,
You know,
I've invited ChatGPT over for drinks and dinner on a Friday night because they've it's I feel like I have to anyways.
I know, right? Right. Well, pretty soon you're gonna be talking to Optimus, it's gonna be sitting there and you're gonna have a chat with them, or it's just gonna be weird to turn around and have Optimus like standing over you looking at what you're doing, it's like, hey, go away. But anyway.
ChatGPT has become my new sounding board for almost everything. From, writing simple emails to, world events and trends to therapy sessions after I talk to my teenage daughter.
So I have a question for you. So I use Perplexity, and I've got it on my
Mhm.
phone, I've got my app and
Yeah.
everything. How many times do you go do a Google search now?
Well, so that's interesting. So actually, I just read a fascinating article on how Google ads are decreasing at alarming rates. They just lost one of their head top talent developers, leaders who left and created their own LLM search engine optimization firm, and it's going to be the new LLM like searching tool out there. So yeah, no,
Okay.
Google searching is becoming obsolete. That they're predicting that it'll be like Yahoo News by the end of next year.
Right,
That
right,
nobody's
right.
going to be using it. Yeah, it's
It,
actually what's really fascinating is for especially for people who try to do online marketing is that the trend of human clicks versus LLM clicks on your website
Mm.
traffic
yeah.
is changing drastically, and that the new web is going to look like just LLM searches, and it's going to be less human searches on the web because
Hmm.
we're just going to wait for the LLM to validate everything for us.
It
So
totally changes SEO, doesn't it? Totally
it it
changes.
it it it, it, com it crushes it redefines the SEO industry right now. So anyone who is doing old school SEO tactics, and I'm telling my marketer right now, like you better get up on this immediately. So yeah,
Absolutely. Well,
That
and stop spending the money right away, right? To try and
right.
generate it, you got to
Yeah.
shift, but then it just changes the way you think about your website and think about all your digital properties as well. Yeah,
Well, and
absolutely.
it's also saying, do you want to optimize your website for LLM readability versus human readability? What's the right blend? So it's yeah, no, it's a rapid. I think marketing is one of the first industries to get completely demolished by AI from
I
a
agree.
human perspective.
I
Yeah.
agree. Yeah, I've got a daughter that works in an ad agency, so I'm like living on the front lines there, you
Ooh.
know. Well, at least she does the research part of it, so that's cool because it's just really elevated what she can do. But yeah, for anyone who doesn't know, LLM is a large language model, and it just is a different way that the world thinks now. And again, happening so fast. It's just unbelievable. But
Yep.
my wife works at a university, and the university just in the last 5 months has had to completely rethink the way they approach AI, because AI was a dirty word, right? And kids are using it to cheat on their term papers
Mhm.
and taking tests and everything. They've had to change because students coming out of high school are using it so much on a daily basis. They're like, I don't want to go to a university that's going to ban AI. I want to go to a
Mm.
university that's going to teach me how to use it, how to incorporate it, how to do it correctly.
Mhm.
So they're having to rethink curriculum and everything. And it's just a fundamental shift. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, it is. I got to drop, but
Yeah,
Keith,
absolutely.
this was a fascinating presentation. And Chuck, thank you as always for putting together such
Yeah,
great forums. But thank you guys. I got to
You
drop.
yeah,
bet.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Connie. Take
yeah.
care.
Absolutely. And this is a great slide to end on. And again, I'll make the offer to anyone on the call. If you would like a subscription, just reach out to me, and I'm happy to pay for that through the COO forum. It's just jam-packed full of information. It's like Keith on automation. So, but if
Well,
everyone would, if you would please just give Keith a round of applause. Thank you so much
Absolutely.
for
Really
your
enjoyed that. Thank you.
time
thanks, everybody.
today. I know we're over the hour, so I'll just keep it brief. Again, thank you, Keith. Thank you to all of our members for taking the time to invest in yourself today and learning not only to improve yourself, but to improve your businesses. I appreciate that so much.